In a big village somewhere in Africa, people lived in different compounds, each with several families. The bonds within these compounds were strong, for the people believed in unity and mutual support. However, in one compound, a woman named Adaeze lived in isolation, her heart hardened by bitterness and anger. Adaeze was known throughout the village for her fierce temper and sharp tongue. She was quick to curse anyone who crossed her, and her words carried a sting that few could forget. Her reputation was such that even the bravest villagers avoided her path. Yet Adaeze's story was one of sorrow as much as it was of anger. Her husband Unamdi had once been a loving and devoted man, but he had fled to another village, unable to endure Adaeze's relentless cruelty. His departure left her alone to raise their twin sons, Chike and Chima, on her own. Before Unamdi left, there was a time when Adaeze was not as fair as she eventually became. In her youth, she was a beautiful and vibrant woman, full of life and laughter. She was admired by many, and it was her fiery spirit that initially attracted Unamdi to her. However, over the years, Adaeze's spirit darkened. The first signs of this change were subtle: an unkind word here, a sharp rebuke there. But as time passed, these instances became more frequent and more severe. Adaeze started to lose her patience with those around her, lashing out at anyone who dared to cross her. It wasn't long before the villagers began to whisper about her behind her back. The ones admired Adaeze had become a figure of fear and loathing. One of the first to feel the brunt of Adaeze's wrath was her neighbor, an elderly woman named Mama Eke. Mama Eke was known in the compound for her wisdom and kindness. She had been a friend to Adaeze's mother and had often helped Adaeze when she was younger. However, as Adaeze's temper grew worse, she began to see Mama Eke's advice as meddling. One day, after a particular harsh scolding from Mama Eke, Adaeze snapped. "Who are you to tell me how to live my life?" Adaeze shouted, her voice echoing through the compound. "You old hag! May your tongue rot in your mouth before you dare to speak to me again." The words were shocking, and the other villagers who heard them gasped in horror. But the damage was done. Mama Eke, hurt and humiliated, withdrew from Adaeze's life. She stopped visiting Adaeze's home and no longer offered her guidance. Not long after, Mama Eke fell ill, her body wasting away as if the very life had been drained from her. Though no one dared to say it aloud, many believe that Adaeze's cause had something to do with Mama Eke's sudden decline. This event marked a turning point for Adaeze. It was as if something inside her had snapped, and from that moment on, she became even more feared. She cursed anyone who displeased her, and her curses seemed to have a life of their own, bringing misfortune to those who crossed her. The villagers began to avoid her, and even Unamdi, her once loving husband, grew distant. Unamdi had tried to be patient. He had loved Adaeze dearly, and he had seen the good in her even when others had not. But as the years passed, even he could no longer endure her cruelty. The final straw came one evening when Unamdi returned home after a long day of work in the field. He was exhausted and hungry, but when he entered their home, he found that Adaeze had not prepared any food. "What have you been doing all day, Adaeze?" Unamdi asked, his voice weary. Adaeze, who had been sitting in the corner of the room, sharpening a knife, looked up at him with cold eyes. "Do I look like your servant? If you want food, go and cook it yourself." Unamdi was taken aback by her harsh words. He had known that Adaeze's temper was fierce, but he had not expected such disdain. "Adaeze," he said softly, trying to calm her, I am your husband. We are supposed to support each other to share our burdens. But Adaeze would hear none of it. She stood up, the knife still in her hand, and walked over to him, her eyes blazing with anger. I do not need you. If you cannot fend for yourself, then leave. Go and find some other woman to cook for you, if that's what you want. Nnamdi could see that there was no reasoning with her. The woman he had married was gone, replaced by someone he no longer recognized. The next morning, Nnamdi took his clothes and left. Adaeze did not weep or feel sorrow. Instead, she felt a strange sense of triumph. She had driven him away, and in her twisted mind, she saw this as a proof of her strength. But as the days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, the reality of her situation began to sink in. Nnamdi was not coming back, and she was left alone to raise their two sons, Chike and Chima. From the moment they were born, Chike and Chima were the center of Adaeze's world. They were identical in appearance, but their personalities could not have been more different. Chike was quiet and thoughtful, often keeping to himself and observing the world around him. Chima, on the other hand, was outgoing and mischievous, always looking for ways to get into trouble. Adaeze loved her sons fiercely, but her love was tainted by the same darkness that had driven away her husband. She was overprotective to the point of suffocation, refusing to let them out of her sight and lashing out at anyone who dared to speak ill of them. As the boys grew older, they began to mimic their mother's behavior, picking up on her anger and using it to their advantage. The other children in the compound quickly learned to avoid the twins. They were known for their cruel pranks and their willingness to resort to violence if things didn't go their way. On one occasion, a boy named Ifeanyi had accidentally bumped into Chima while playing, causing Chima to fall and scrape his knee. Enraged, Chima had tackled Ifeanyi to the ground, pummeling him with his fist until the boy was left bruised and bleeding. When Ifeanyi's mother, Amaka, confronted Adaeze about the incident, she was met with a torrent of curses. Your son should learn to be more careful, Adaeze had shouted, her eyes wide with fury. If he ever touches my Chima again, I will curse him until he cannot walk. Amaka, frightened and helpless, took her son and fled, leaving Adaeze to fume in her anger. It was incidents like these that caused the other families in the compound to keep their distance from Adaeze and her sons. They whispered among themselves, warning their children to steer clear of the twins and their cursed mother. As the twins grew older, their behavior became more erratic and dangerous. They began to steal from the other families in the compound, taking food, money, and anything else they could get their hands on. Adaeze, blinded by her love for her sons, refused to believe that they were responsible for these thefts. Instead, she accused the other children of framing Chike and Chima out of jealousy. One day, Adaeze fetched a pot of water from the stream and placed it outside her hut, intending to use it later. She stepped away briefly, and during that time, a young boy from the compound named Obi, unaware that the water belonged to her, used it to quench his thirst. When Adaeze returned and found that the part of the water had been used, her fury knew no bounds. She stormed into the compound, her voice booming as she demanded to know who had dared to use her water. Obi, realizing his mistake, ran to his mother, Nneka, and confessed what he had done. Nneka, trembling with fear, approached Adaeze, pleading for forgiveness. It was my son, Obi. He didn't know the water was yours. Please, Adaeze, forgive him. But Adaeze was not one to forgive easily. She unleashed a torrent of curses upon Obi, her voice dripping with venom. The other families in the compound gathered around, pleading with Adaeze to reverse the curse, but she refused. I do not know how to take back a curse, she shouted, her eyes blazing with rage. Days turned into weeks, and young Obi fell ill with a mysterious sickness. His mother wept as she took him to the village priest, who prayed over him and prepared healing herbs. Slowly, Obi began to recover, but the memory of Adaeze's curse lingered like a dark cloud over the compound. The other mothers, terrified of Adaeze's wrath, warned their children to avoid her and her twins at all costs. As time passed, the twins grew wilder, more uncontrollable. They began stealing from their own mother, taking food and trinkets from her hut. Adaeze, unaware that her sons were the culprit, cursed whoever dared to steal from her, not realizing she was damning her own flesh and blood. The twins were cunning and knew how to cover their tracks. They would steal small amounts at a time, never enough to draw too much attention, but enough to satisfy their desires. They took from their mother as easily as they took from the other villagers, and they found a twisted sense of pleasure in watching Adaeze lash out at the imagined thieves. One day, the tension between the twins boiled over. They got into a fierce argument, their voices echoing through the compound. The fight escalated quickly, turning violent as they hurled insults and blows at each other. The other families watched in fear, too afraid to intervene, knowing the wrath that would follow if they did. Adaeze tried to separate her sons, but her curses had taken hold. Her words had poisoned her own family. Chike, in a fit of rage, pushed his brother Chima hard, causing him to lose his balance and fall. Chima landed awkwardly, injuring his back. At first, it seemed like a minor injury, but as days turned into weeks, Chima's condition worsened. He could no longer stand straight, and the pain in his back became unbearable. Despite the village healer's best efforts, Chima never fully recovered. The injury led to severe complications, and his health deteriorated rapidly. Adaeze watched in helpless despair as her once strong son grew weaker and weaker, until one sorrowful day, Chima succumbed to the complications from his injury and passed away. The compound felt silent, the weight of the tragedy pressing down on everyone. Chima was gone, his life snuffed out by the very curses his mother had unleashed. Grief-stricken, Adaeze turned her fury on Chike, cursing him with all the bitterness in her heart. But the villagers, witnessing the horror, rejected her curses, refusing to be dragged into a cycle of hate. As the village elders came to arrest Chike for his brother's death, he panicked and tried to escape through the window. In his haste, he fell, hitting his head against a stone. The impact was fatal. Chike died instantly, leaving Adaeze alone with the devastating consequences of her own actions. Adaeze's cries echoed through the compound as she cursed herself, realizing too late that her own words had destroyed her family. The village elders, having witnessed the destruction, summoned her and decreed that she was never to curse again. If she did, she would be banished from the village. From that day on, Adaeze became silent. Her voice no longer heard in the compound. She refused to speak to anyone, living in a self-imposed exile within her own hut. The villagers began to call her the mute curser, a woman who had lost everything to her own wickedness. Months passed, and Adaeze's health began to deteriorate. She grew weaker by the day, but she said nothing to anyone. The neighbors, still wary of her, noticed her absence but did nothing. After 2 days without seeing her, they decided to check on her. Looking through her window, they found her lifeless body lying on the floor. The village elders were called, and when they entered her hut, they found something that left them speechless. Beside her body were some calabashes, carefully arranged with symbols of forgiveness and blessing. Adaeze, in her final moment, had expressed her sorrow and sought to undo the harm she had caused. The villagers, moved by this final gesture, wept for her. They mourned not only her death, but the tragic end of her lineage, wiped out by her own hand. The story of Adaeze became a cautionary tale in the village, a lesson that the evil one souls will eventually come back to haunt them. The villagers could not easily forget the impact Adaeze had on their community. Her story was retold for generations, often used as a warning to children about the dangers of anger and unchecked emotions. Parents would remind their children of the causes that could be born out of anger and how those causes could ripple out, affecting not just the intended target, but the ones closest to them. Yet, there was another side to Adaeze's legacy, a lesson in forgiveness and redemption. While her actions had led to the destruction of her own family, her final act of seeking forgiveness showed the villagers that even in the darkest of times, there is always room for remorse and the hope of redemption. The calabashes found beside Adaeze's body were kept in the village shrine as a reminder of the power of forgiveness. The elders will often take the young men and women to the shrine, telling them the story of the mute Kosa and showing them the symbols she left behind. They would teach them that words once spoken could never be taken back, but that seeking forgiveness was a step toward healing, even if it came too late. Adaeze's heart remained untouched for many years, a silent reminder of what had happened. The villagers believed it was cursed, and no one dared to enter it. Eventually, the hut crumbled with time, reclaimed by the earth, but the memory of Adaeze lingered on, etched into the hearts and minds of the people. The words we speak have power to build or to destroy. Adaeze's story teaches us that anger and curses can bring unimaginable pain, even to those we love. We must be mindful of our actions and words, for they can shape our destiny and the destiny of those around us. Let us choose kindness and forgiveness, for in so doing, we bring peace to our hearts and to our communities. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe to my channel. Your support encourages me to create more interesting and captivating stories for you to enjoy. Thank you. Bye.